Hi, welcome to the Helen Bader Foundation CBRF Caregiver Training Program. This unit is on the management and administration of medications in the CBRF. I'm Maren Meyer, and this is Part 1, Medication Basics. We realize how important it is for you to have a basic understanding and knowledge about medications and how they're managed and administered, both for your residents in the CBRF and for you. I'm a pharmacist. My interests right now are in long-term care of all kinds and in public health education. I've been involved in medication safety in the CBRF since about 1992. And since 1994, I've been teaching a medication administration course. I've also written a couple of books that are related to this topic. One helps pharmacists work with you, the CBRF caregivers, in providing better medication care for your residents. And the other is called Coping with Medications, and it covers a lot of the same information that you'll find in these units. And it also has information of interest to elderly consumers. But right now, let's just get started with medication basics. Now, I've made a few notes to try to keep me on track. This is a very large field of information, and I have a tendency to ramble off. So if you see me referring to my notes, don't get worried. Each of the units begins with a pre-test. The pre-test and the post-test are identical. Their purpose is not for you to receive a grade, but it's to help you identify what you already know and what kind of information we want you to learn from each part of this unit. So even though they aren't graded, we want you to take them pretty seriously. They're to help you identify your progress. Now, during the presentation, feel free to take notes in your workbook and stop the video anytime that you want to go back and review, or if you find that I'm getting boring, go ahead and stop the video and come back when you're feeling alert and ready to learn. Right now, stop the video, complete the pretest, and then come back. Welcome back. Part 1, Medication Basics, is going to cover a number of topics. We'll talk about drug sources, the uses for medications, what happens to drugs once they get into the body, drug references and resources, and we'll just touch on drug standards and laws. Now, when you look at your workbook, you'll notice that it's kind of fat. At the end of the workbook, there is a copy of HSS 83, only the medication-related portions. And those are there for your reference. We'll just be referring to them as we need them throughout the various parts of the unit, so don't let that intimidate you. Let's get right into the meat of the matter. I'm going to be using the terms drug, medicine, and medication interchangeably throughout the presentation. What are drugs? Basically, they're any chemical that affects living things. They come from a number of sources. They come from plants, animals, mineral deposits, and chemical manufacturing. What do we use drugs for? We use them to prevent illness. We use them to treat the symptoms of an existing illness. We use them to cure disease, and we can also use them to diagnose conditions. What happens to drugs once they get into the body? This is just one of the most fascinating parts of the study of drugs. It's called pharmaco for drugs, kinetics for motion. So the study is called pharmacokinetics, and it really involves 4 parts. That's the absorption of the drug, the distribution of the drug to the tissues, the metabolism of the drug to break it down, and the excretion of the drug to eliminate it from the body. Absorption is the process that occurs when a drug has been administered to a body and it enters the bloodstream. In order to be absorbed, every drug must get dissolved. Now, this means that the more fluid that a drug is taken with, the more likely the drug is to be absorbed quickly. So when I see people taking a pill where they take it and then they take a tiny sip of water, I just cringe. I know that that's not going to be absorbed quickly. The best way to administer drugs so that they're absorbed quickly is either to give them in a liquid form or to wet your palate first so your entire intestinal tract is nice and moist, put the pills in the mouth, and then follow it with 3 to 4 ounces of fluid. Now, in the case where you've crushed medications and put them in pudding or applesauce, as long as the individual is not on a fluid-restricted diet, there's no reason that that shouldn't be followed with the appropriate thickness of fluid that constitutes 3 to 4 ounces. And that's about a half a cup. That's a lot more than most of us give. There are a lot of factors that affect the absorption of drugs. That can be food, the duration of the drug being in the body. So if a person is constipated and their intestines are moving very slowly, that drug is in contact with an absorptive surface for a long time, more may be absorbed. Likewise, if the individual has diarrhea, less may be absorbed. So it's important to keep track of those things. One of the factors that's going to affect drug absorption the most is going to be the route by which you administer it. You can determine the onset of action of a drug by altering the route. So for example, if you need immediate drug action, you might administer a drug like nitroglycerin under the tongue where it gets absorbed into the blood vessels and goes right into the bloodstream. Another fast way would be by inhalation with those puffers that people use for asthma. That takes the drug right into the lungs where it's absorbed by those blood vessels right away and it gets distributed to the tissues where it's needed. A third fast way of administering drugs is by intravenous injection. That means injection into the vein. And that's very fast, but it has its own risks. Normally we administer drugs orally. That means by mouth. That's the safest way, but it's also the slowest way. So when you see the ads, they go plop, plop, fizz, fizz, and they make the claim that that drug acts so rapidly. Indeed it does, because it's already in solution. So it's important to remember that your route is going to affect things, but every drug, regardless of the way that it's administered, must get dissolved. Now, when you're thinking about this, let's do a little quiz. Which would be absorbed faster, a tablet or an oral liquid? Right, the oral liquid, because it's already dissolved. Now, once a drug gets absorbed, it seems pretty basic. Gets into the bloodstream, it goes to those cells, and it acts. Wrong. It has to go through the bloodstream, and the bloodstream is not just some casual flow of a liquid. There's a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot going on in the bloodstream. There are cells, there are proteins, and the drug can get bound to many of those things, keeping it from being active. Only the free drug that's dissolved in the bloodstream is available to act on the cells. One of the ways that drugs get distributed is they bind to these proteins that are in the bloodstream. And in a lot of cases, say with analgesics like ibuprofen, naproxen, ketoprofen, a large percentage of the drug is bound to proteins. So only maybe 2% or 2 molecules out of 100 would be free to act on the cells and provide the action. That's not normally a problem unless an individual has too few protein molecules or unless there's another drug competing for those protein sites. For example, if you gave that same individual Dilantin, which is also very highly protein bound, there might be some competition on those protein molecules. And you could see an effect that would be unexpected based on the dose that you gave. So it's more complicated than it sounds right up front. Metabolism is the process by which the body breaks drugs down to make them not toxic or not poisonous. The purpose of metabolism, which occurs mainly in the liver but can occur in other tissues as well, is to transform the drugs into a water-soluble product that gets excreted through the kidneys. So the liver breaks it down into these inactive, usually inactive products. There's another potential problem there in the liver because there are only so many sites that can break drugs down. And sometimes we have competition for those sites. And that's something that prescribers and dispensers have to keep in mind when they start combining a number of drugs in one person's body. So the drugs are absorbed, they're distributed through the bloodstream, they're broken down in the liver, excuse me, and then they're excreted from the body in the kidneys. The longer the drug stays in the body, the longer the effect. So if an individual has liver problems that keep them from breaking the drug down, or if they have kidney problems that keep them from excreting the drug, then the drug may last longer than we hoped. Let's talk for a few minutes about drug names. I love this section. There are a number of ways that you can name drugs. Drugs are made by chemists, and chemists are different than the rest of us, okay? They provide names that allow any other chemist to visualize what a product looks like. And in section D, you'll see one of the chemical names. It's 6-chloro-3,4-dihydro-2-H, 1,2,4-benzothiazide, 7-sulfonamide, 1,1-dioxide. Okay? That is not a practical way to call a product. And so they only use the chemical name when they're trying to describe the actual item to another chemist. Just in everyday conversation, even chemists would use the generic name of the drug. The generic name gives a little information about what the drug is and what it's supposed to do and what it looks like, but it's a lot more practical. Drugs in each country have only one generic name. Now, sometimes generic names will vary. For example, if you've been in Canada or in Mexico, you may find that the generic name of a drug is different there. When a drug is approved by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, it receives an official name that goes into the official books recording that the drug exists. And the first manufacturer that makes the drug usually receives a 20-year patent, and using that patent, they bring out onto the market a product which they give a trade or brand name to. An example of a trade or brand name is Tylenol. Okay, Tylenol is the brand name of acetaminophen. And for those first 20 years, all we heard was Tylenol, Tylenol, Tylenol. And now that the drug is off of patent, we don't normally just call it acetaminophen. Even when we're referring to another brand, we have a tendency to say Tylenol because we're accustomed to it. There's an example of drug naming in your workbook, and you might want to look at that. It is always a good idea to know the generic name of a drug. If your resident receives Lasix, that drug needs to also be labeled with the generic name furosemide, because there are many different brands of each generic drug. And in order for you to look those things up in your drug reference, in order for the resident to learn about the medication, in order for your pharmacist to keep track of things, we need to know the generic names. And that is something that carries true even when the drug has a combination of ingredients in it. Moving on to drug references. Boy, if this isn't a quagmire. There are so many different books out there, and so many of them are they terrorize people. They have these laundry list of side effects that would keep anybody from ever wanting to take a medication again. Okay? That's not the purpose of a good reference. A good reference is going to tell you a description of the drug. What is it? How does it work? What is its action? What is its indication? The indication means, why do you prescribe it? Why are you receiving it? You're receiving hydrochlorothiazide to treat blood pressure. That would be the indication. And its action is that it changes the salt and fluid balance in the body. You need to know the contraindications. Under what circumstances should a drug not be given? Some blood pressure medicines shouldn't be given to people who are pregnant. Okay? Those are contraindications. Precautions are similar to contraindications. Then you want to know the adverse reactions that could occur. But you need to know not every single reaction that's ever been reported, but you really want to know what are the most common things that could occur. Are they dangerous? What things could uncommonly or infrequently occur that are of concern and need to be treated by a physician right away? And how do those things appear? Okay? That's important information. Also, the normal dosage. Do you normally give 400 milligrams or do you give 4? That kind of information should be easily accessible in your drug reference. Most of the books that most of us use don't have that information in a usable form. What I'd like for you to do is look around your facility, see what kind of products are used frequently, write down the names of those drugs, write down the reasons you know they're being used, and go shopping. You can go to the library first, that's what I would suggest. Go to your pharmacy and ask the pharmacist to see their references and see whether or not a particular drug reference gives you the information you need in a form that makes sense to you. Because if it's not written in an English that you read and understand, then it's as meaningless as the 1,2-dihydrodichlorodianiline that you would find in the package insert. In the package insert, you will find the information that you find in the PDR. The PDR is a book that we've included information about it in your packet. Let's go now to drug laws. The US government has laws or standards that control the quality of medications in the United States. Now, our laws here are very strict. And sometimes you'll hear in the news that a drug has been available in Europe or it's been available in Costa Rica for many years. Our laws are strict because US citizens have demanded that. We view protection from unsafe drugs as our right, and we view it as the government's responsibility to protect us from unsafe medications. So we don't just accept a death here and a death there. We expect our drugs to be well tested and certified as safe and effective. The drug laws apply across the entire country. So if you get a medicine in Arizona, Maryland, or Wisconsin, it should have the same quality. Now, there are a particular set of drugs that are considered particularly dangerous or likely to be abused, and those are the controlled substances. You'll see in the overhead that controlled substances are chemicals with a high potential for abuse, and they're listed in 5 schedules. The drugs in Schedule 1 have no accepted medicinal purpose in the United States, and that would include things like LSD, heroin, and crack cocaine. Schedule 2 drugs are things like Ritalin, morphine, Percocet, and they require a written prescription each time the drug is ordered. It has to be written and signed by the physician. So when you have somebody who's on one of those medications, you need to be able to plan in advance to receive that written prescription so that it can be filled before your resident runs out of medicine. The number of doses and refills in the other 3 schedules, that's Schedules 3, 4, and 5, are also restricted. There's a maximum of 5 refills, and the refills have to be obtained in a 6-month period. The purpose is not so much to limit access to these drugs as it is to make sure that people are being followed by their physician and that they're receiving the safest therapy. On the following pages, there's this fairly large section of material that includes the CBRF rules that apply to medications in the CBRF. And it would be a good idea if you would sit down, prop your feet up, and read through this material. The more times that you read through it, the more likely it is to make sense to you. We'll just be referring to that information as it's needed throughout the different parts of this unit. This pretty much wraps up Part 1, Medication Basics. If you recall, there's a post-test at the end of each unit. And the post-test is the same as the pre-test. It's not graded, though. It's just to help you identify whether or not you've gotten the information we were hoping you would learn here. When you finish the post-test, I want you to come back and we'll talk about the answers. Right now, stop the video and complete the post-test, and then come back. Welcome back. Hopefully that was easier than it was the first time. Now let's go through the answers. Number 1, a drug may have many generic names, but only one trade or brand name. That's false. To make it true, we would say a drug may have only one generic name and can have many trade or brand names. Number 2, in order to be absorbed, all medicines must be dissolved in the body. True. We talked about that during the absorption section. 3, some drugs come from mineral deposits in the earth. That's true. They also come from plants, animals, and chemical manufacturing. Number 4, either constipation or diarrhea may affect drug absorption. True. Also food, dose, route of administration. Number 5, which of these drugs or drug categories can cure some illnesses? Well, of the things that you were given there, only B, antibiotics, is correct. Number 6, a good drug reference book for CBRFs is D, all of the above. It's easy to read, it's reasonably priced, and it might be recommended by your pharmacist. Number 7, vaccines are used, C, to prevent an illness from occurring, even though we do use drugs for the other options here. Number 8, most drugs are excreted or removed from the body through A, the kidneys. Well, I've enjoyed being with you through this part of medication administration and management in the CBRFs. I hope the information has been useful to you, and I hope you'll join me for part 2.